Welcome back to Panda Pen Club. Today I'm going to be reviewing a much loved and certainly distinctive fountain pen, the Jinhao 993 Shark pen. Now the first thing to say about this pen is it's shaped like a shark. The other reasons it's much loved are its very reasonable price. Depending on where you look, it's in the $3, $2, $1 sort of category. And most people tend to then emphasize again, oh yes, and it looks like a shark, which seems to be its main selling point. The $2, $3 price point leads some people to describe this pen as a throwaway pen, which I find maybe just a little bit obnoxious. I kind of think of it as, well, it's a hefty piece of plastic. You're renting a load of resources from the world. I encounter a lot of $2, $3 pens with this channel. And I have to say, a lot of them are absolutely stunningly good. There's no reason why a $2, $3 pen should not be assessed on quite a challenging level, because there are some excellent pens at that price point. So, does the Jinhao Shark hit where it ought to hit? First thing to say is it's a very long pen, capped anyway. It's 154 millimeters in length, which is very long indeed. Uncapped, as you see it now, it is more in the region of 124 millimeters. Posted, it's 154 millimeters-ish as well. So it's a long, long pen, but it's also a very light pen. About 11 grams in weight with the converter, no ink. About 9 grams in weight without the converter at all, should that particular metric be relevant to anyone at all. It's blue plastic. It's a somewhat demonstrator. The section is transparent enough to monitor the ink levels assiduously should you wish to do so. Oh yeah, and it's shaped like a shark. What is it about sharks that holds this big level of interest for us? Sometimes these pens are sold in packs of 12. They're available in every colour of the rainbow, and you're encouraged sometimes to buy the whole lot. The makers of this pen are clearly banking on the shark having some sort of cachet or appeal with certain groups of people. Those groups, I would say those groups are comprised of little kids who you want to get interested in fountain pens, and adults to whom the quirk factor or cool factor speaks to a degree. And it certainly is interesting to have a pen that's been so successfully designed to look like a particular animal. And not just any animal, but a super predator. When I was a kid in school, this was the pen I carried around. And a very good pen it is too, the Parker Vector. I think I'd have been delighted to bring this one into school. I think I'd probably have got a detention for the outrageous display of individuality, but kids in my school carried briefcases as well, so this kind of thing would have been considered rather dangerous, just like sharks are considered rather dangerous. But is it fair how we look at sharks, and should we fear them? According to the International Shark Attack File, which is a very incendiary name for an academic project maintained by the University of Florida, there were 80 shark attacks on humans in 2012. According to research published in the journal Marine Policy by Boris Worm, 100 million sharks were killed by humans in 2012. And we're scared of them. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, 1/3 of shark species are under threat of extinction, whereas sharks as a species are ancient. They have successfully survived 4 of the last 5 mass extinctions, and yet, because of overfishing and climate change, they're now under threat, and we're scared of them. It seems the human race can't be doing without an enemy, and they've picked sharks. Well, they are pretty unpleasant. This species that's older than Mount Everest, older than trees, is under threat because of us, and we're scared of them. That's how we operate as human beings. Terrifying but fascinating enemies. They're almost fetishized. And you can see that fetishization at work in the cap of this pen, where most of the legwork for the shark design is done. We have little eyes lovingly crafted into either side. We have 4 gills on either side. We have that extraordinarily dour expression which I certainly associate with some of the more unpleasant and murky species of shark. And of course we have the dorsal fin, which is kept it is always to be found located in the same position, directly in between the 2 shaved grips, and that's due to the double threading. And I do admire double threading when I see it. So there we are, we have our dorsal fin, which is of course probably the most essential iconic feature. Interesting to have the grip of the pen on the outside, not covered by the cap. I was rummaging through my brain trying to think of other pens that have an external grip or section, and the only one I could think of was the Pilot Vanishing Point, which, due to its retractable nib, has the place where you grip the pen on the outside. And very effective it is too in my book. You can also see a sort of submarining similarity between these two. What the comparison with the Vanishing Point also points up is the absence of a clip on the shark pen. The clip on the Vanishing Point, some people pay to have these removed. Personally, I find them very useful for directing my grip and keeping my grip in one place. Quite like the clip on the Vanishing Point. Quite like clips in general. And the Jinhao 993 does not sport clip. The dorsal fin certainly acts as a lovely little roll stop, and it's also a useful grip for uncapping the pen, which caps very tightly, but no clip. Which makes sense if you think about it. If the target market for this pen is little kids, perhaps on this pen the lack of a clip is excusable. The closing of every part of this pen is extremely tight. The plastic is very thick, very solid, and that's reassuring because of this tightness. On normal plastic pens at this price point, you would be worried about cracking, but because of this thick plastic, you're not too worried about how tightly they tend to close. All this tightness that they offer speaks to the eyedropper potential of these pens, which is certainly worth exploring. The words Jinhao are also etched onto the undercarriage of the pen, identifying it. Jinhao is obviously being the brand name. Look at me trying to cover up this little coffee stain on my card. The other interesting point to note about the external grip is because it's external, it means the threads are below your fingers when you write. Again, very unusual. Some people might appreciate this because some people don't like the sensation of their fingers touching threads as they're writing. Personally, it's never, ever troubled me. People who are troubled by that maybe would find this rather appealing, having the threads below your grip. 3 turns to open your pen lid, which is considerable. You have the hooded nib down here, which looks like a little shark's tooth. Moving on to the shaft of the pen, it's a very long and tapering shaft, which terminates in a very eye-pokey little pen. If your kid is a monstrous epicenter of malice, I would recommend guiding them away from that before trying to guide them towards fountain pens, particularly fountain pens shaped like super predators. Not least because you could have somebody's eye out with the lower finial. We have this tapering conclusion to the pen because it's clearly intended to be posted. And very tightly it can be posted too. It's very light, all the materials are extremely light, so the balance is absolutely fine posted. And of course, if you've invested in this pen, I think it is strongly encouraged to post because you will then be writing with the point of the pen beaming up at you, or rather dolefully peering up at you. Now, why do people want that? Why do they want to be constantly reminded about the existence of sharks? Perhaps it's just because they're plain old weird. Why are sharks weird? They have no bones. They are entirely made of cartilage. When they die, the salt water will dissolve them, and all that will be left is a set of teeth. They have no shadow. Or rather, the lantern shark has no shadow because it is capable of emitting exactly the light that's filtering down into its surroundings, so it can loom downwards onto the ocean floor and eat whatever's trying to go about its business down there without any warning. Sinister. Greenland sharks reach sexual maturity at the age of 150. There are Greenland sharks alive today that were alive when Henry VIII came to the throne of England in 1509. Greenland sharks have been found with polar bears in their stomachs. That troubles me. I don't know about you. Sharks are quite literally covered in teeth. Instead of scales, like most fish, they have dermal denticles, which are modified teeth, which make them very smooth. Pio-ju, which means pearls in the skin. That smoothness that sharks have that allows them to slip through the water so efficiently and take a chunk out of you. They never sleep. They're constantly pumping water over their gills to stay alive. They're always ready. And perhaps most potently, they always move forwards. They can only swim forwards. My view of this pen is going to be entirely dictated by the writing experience. At this price point, there are loads of great pens. Loads of wonderful pens for you to consider. So let's move on to the writing sample and see whether the Jinhao 993 Shark hits the mark. Ooh. This is another issue with the easily tightened cap. I often accidentally unscrew the section instead of the cap. So that's one thing to bear in mind. You can, of course, tighten the section more and tighten the cap less, which helps to solve the problem. Now, the Jinhao 993 Shark. It's a hooded, extra fine nib. I'm writing on Stylology paper. The ink I'm using is diamine oxblood, inspired by the idea of polar bears in Greenland sharks' stomachs. Our Jinhao 993 has eaten an ox. What have I got to say about this nib? That's the trouble, you see. It's entirely unremarkable. Look how dry it is. Look how dry it lays down ink on the page. And look how sharp it is. Pointy little thing with no flex, of course, if you've left the pen on its own for a little while. I've had to soak this pen overnight a couple of times because it just wouldn't start. Resentful, near caustic, like a little dry cough onto the page. Lovely panda seeks jinxed zebra for quick game of whist. So you can see the pen's keeping up with some quite fast writing, but it's very dry. Look at that, instantly. And again, this suggests it would be quite good for kids, and probably quite good for left-handers, like me. Less scope for smudging your exercise book. Dry, bordering on caustic. But if you're a grown-up using this pen, and if you've bought it because it's a shark, you may find that you're not using it a great deal. Another thing that might feel a bit weird is how close you are to the page with your fingers. There's not a lot of room for some reason. I feel a bit scrunched up. It's a bit like a biro. So dry, so devoid of character, which is ironic given the surplus of personality the pen is insisting it has with its external appearance. I think the lesson with this pen is not to try too hard. Be the real you. That is more than sufficient. Avoid the Jinhao Shark pen. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the Panda Pen Club channel on YouTube. Thanks for watching. The Roman poet Oppian described sharks like this. He said, "They rave for food with unceasing frenzy, being always hungry and never abating the gluttony of their terrible maw. For what food shall be sufficient to fill the void?" Crikey. The Iraqi judge, Zakaria Chazwini, and I welcome corrections of my pronunciation and I apologise for it, who wrote The Wonders of Creation and the Oddities of Existence, described sharks as a great evil in the sea, teeth like spearheads, as long as a palm tree, eyes like fires of blood. All other species run away from it. Well, they would, wouldn't they? Christ. That's how we've seen sharks throughout the centuries. What hope have they got?